You're listening to the Living Mandala podcast. My name is Zara. And the podcast series, which I'm calling the Living Enneagram Mandala, that's going to be the title here. I'm joined by Joanna Douglas, who we all met the last episode with Insight Consulting, Insight Coaching, I guess is really what you do. And so this episode is going to be all about Enneagram Type 1,
Yes.
Loosely called the Reformer. So tell us about this type. Let's go on a journey with the Type 1.
Absolutely. Enneagram Type 1 is actually, if you're looking at the shape, happen to have that in front of you, maybe you look it up, it's actually the second stop. The 9 is at the very top, but we start at 1. And the 1 is reformer, be right. This type of person tends to seek to do good, do the right thing. They tend to be very reliable, responsible, honest, sometimes more honest than you'd like. But they are very well intentioned. They're conscientious, hardworking. These are people on your team that catch all of the grammar mistakes, or person in your home who washes the dishes and there are no little clumps of spaghetti sauce anywhere on that piece. They're probably organizing the spices in the home and things like that. But they are, depending on where they are on their growth journey, might over control. They might repress their own anger. This is a what we call a body type. I won't go too in depth, but I'll just mention that they have a unique relationship with anger. It can come out overtly if they get sort of pushed to an edge, or sometimes it might leak out in some other way, like a judgment. But anger tends to be their emotional issue, whether that is expressed or not. But these are when they are healthy, wonderful people to have in your home, because they're always going to check, is that the right thing to do? Should we be doing that?
So in terms of, walking through a handful of correspondences, when I hear you speak, I associate this with the planet Mercury. Reason being, Mercury is the planet of communication, but it's got a lot of focus on logic and reason and perfectionism, quite frankly, similar to Mercury's association with communication and analysis. So when I hear you talk about 1, I think about the planet Mercury. I also think about Virgos and Capricorns, okay, for better, for worse. So both Virgo and Capricorn, they share a concern for order, for detail, for doing things right, which, sort of sounds like the reformer's focus on improvement. So it doesn't mean, I'm not saying that all Virgos and Capricorns are type 1s. I'm definitely not saying that. But I'm just saying what you've just stated about the type 1, it does sound kind of Virgoan and Capricornian to me. In terms of the runes, 2 of them kind of bubbled up. One is Fehu and one is Thurisaz. Fehu is all about new beginnings and order. So this sort of aligns with this reformer type's desire for improvement, as I feel like that's one of the underlying things with type 1 is like it's an ongoing desire for improvement to, on the journey towards perfection, quite frankly.
Absolutely, yes. They have an inner critic usually that is driving them towards that perfect state.
It probably pisses them off sometimes.
It depends. Some people I've talked to have named their inner critic.
Oh, genius.
I've started asking that. There's enough people who identify as 1, at least in my reality, that in my typing interviews I now ask, does it have a name? And if they say, oh, yes, it's Beverly or whatever, I'm like, okay, that is an indicator. Yeah, it's a data point.
Okay, so Fehu, is about beginnings and order aligning with that desire for improvement. But Thurisaz is about challenge and breaking down the old to make way for the new. And to me, this kind of mirrors the reformer's drive for perfection. I have associated the crown chakra with the Enneagram Type 1. because the crown chakra, has something to do with idealism, connection to something higher. So I'm saying crown chakra.
Yeah, makes sense.
In terms of the tarot, and I'm just working with the major arcana. I'm not a tarot expert, but the major arcana is, it's the set of cards within the tarot that really embodies the main archetypes of humanity. So I've got the Hierophant, which is about seeking truth, following principles, adhering to the system, the code, but then also the Justice card, because it's about fairness, it's about balance, it's about that desire for a just world. And I think you said that earlier, that it's about honesty and wanting to know the truth, that these are kind of key words. So justice rings true.
They really like rules. So that really fits into that part of this Hierophant and the other name that you mentioned, Justice. Yeah, it is very black and white. It is right and wrong. Right. And usually they are the deciders of what is right.
Of course. Now, let's talk about, how this type manifests in the house. So, we've kind of pointed towards it, order, efficiency, a clear system in place for the house and home. Some of the strengths might be, that overall it's a well-organized and functional space. Everything's got a designated place within the home. They probably clean meticulously, maybe.
Yeah.
But, in terms of, a weakness, some of the weaknesses that certainly come to mind would be, this is a type of person that might get bogged down in the details of the home. Like you were mentioning the spice rack organization. I'm like, boy, we've got free time to be zooming in on the spice rack. Well, all right. It can get real rigid, I guess.
That's right. That's a great word for interest. That could be a limitation. And that is some of the work that ones need to do to go back home, is to drop some of that rigidity.
Right. Well, and spend more time enjoying your space instead of cleaning your space.
Right.
Right. And then there's also the phenomenon that kind of comes to mind is like humans are just incredibly good at self-sabotage. And, is there a scenario like where there's a type 1 who's like incredibly messy, but it's more because they're in a low functioning, self-sabotagey kind of space.
Absolutely. I can see that happening. And some ones will say, let's say they're on the beginning of a growth path, and they'll talk about, we'll talk about how does it show up? How does this air quote oneness show up? And sometimes it can be, again, if they're on the very beginning of their journey, it can be a hyper focus on one area of the house that keeps them from doing. You mentioned, we've been talking about the spices. It could also be laundry. The laundry, they're sitting waiting for the dryer to ding. All of the clothes need to come out while they're hot and be folded while they're hot.
Well, and another, because then they don't get wrinkled, Joey.
And then another type is, well, I'll spray some water on it and shake it off before I leave the house.
Or just not do laundry for a while.
But yes, I can see how you could see someone self-sabotage with going the antithesis of what they might think is right or acceptable.
And it sounds like a 1 probably operates pretty well if it's just the 1 living alone. But how does a 1, I wonder, live with others? How to be married to a 1 or to have a child who's a 1, or, what is some guidance that, those of us who live with 1s, I'm not saying I don't live with any 1s, people, but
I don't either.
Sounds nice.
But some of my thing, but some of my closest friends are.
But what's it like to live with a 1? How can we best live with a 1?
Yeah, I think we can best live with a 1, much like we might need to live with others, which is understand that and have some compassion for, there is an inner critic operating 90 to 100% of the time, criticizing them pretty harshly about every single thing they do.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's tough. And one of the ways to live with a 1 and to love and appreciate a 1 is let them rock their exactness and rigidity in the areas, in their zones of genius. But criticizing them or saying, your house is messy, or You're not putting the spices in the right place is kryptonite to them and can be very damaging. And so I think in a 1 in your home, walking in and saying, boy, it looks like hood nanny in here is not helpful and can be very damaging, because all you're doing is the inner critic will take that, add it to the voice and say, see, Joanna thinks your house is a mess, or see, even Joanna thinks you're horrible. So I just think pausing, if you live with a 1, pausing, I think also doing the work that they said they were going to do is probably not a good way either. I think just an extra dose of patience with a 1 and avoiding criticizing a 1 about their way they're keeping their home, or criticizing anything, but particularly since we're talking about the home, would be really helpful.
Right. Well, I appreciate the mention of compassion to, remind yourself that like you said, they have this noisy inner critic that's kind of a jerk and not very nice. And who knows where that comes from, right? Nature, nurture. But yeah, that rings true, and that feels right. And of course, I'm like, well, when they're going to judge me, like, what am I? They come to my house and I'm too messy for them.
They're probably going to tell you. A 1 is probably going to tell you. I believe there are subtypes of each of the type, which we won't go into here, but some are going to handle it differently. So there is a particular type of 1, particularly if they might be your mother or I have an aunt who is this way, who will just tell you, Joanna, your hair's a mess, you need to lose 10 pounds, and your house is dirty. Look.
And God bless them. Somebody's got to tell Joanna this information. It might as well be me. It might as well be me.
I love her, so I must tell her. But most 1s will tell you.
Got it. Okay, well, that's helpful, I guess. All right. Well, anything else to say about Enneagram type 1 before we move on to type 2?
My guess is that most 1s don't have a lot of bric-a-brac around the house. It's probably they're not one of the more sentimental types. Well, one of them tends to be a little bit, of the 3 subtypes, tends to be a little more sentimental, but it's probably a pretty streamlined, modern house.
Right.
And comfort is not the ultimate. It's probably the lines. And so friends of mine that are 1s, house tends to be pretty modern and streamlined with not a lot of stuff around.
Functional.
Yes, very functional.
And functional. Makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, here we go. You've been listening to the Living Mandala podcast. We'll be back in a couple weeks' time with Enneagram type 2, the helper.